And so now it's time for what may well turn out to be our most lively and controversial session, the Great Debate. During this session, just remember, who was in a debating team at school? Quite a few. I was too, but it was a long time ago. During this session, we're going to be exploring the notion that neighbourhoods are dead and the individual now reigns supreme. And this is a really interesting topic and one I have a lot of views on myself. My neighbourhood's not dead because we're fighting for our local pub to survive because we love it. So that's our rallying point. I'd now like to hand over to our debate adjudicator and a great friend of our community, the Honourable Joan Kirner.
We sang louder than them. Can we win now?
No bias in this adjudicator at all. Thank you, Dennis, not. And I'm afraid the crime rate is going to go up today because I threatened Dennis Moriarty with murder if he did this to me. And there had only been one worse thing, and that's my hero Kevin Sheedy singing it. Now you've done it. He won't, I hope, be able to do it, but you never know with sheets. Thank you, Rhonda and Joe, for inviting me to chair this debate. It's great fun to be chairing a debate. I'm sure it's better than reaching over the table in Parliament House as part of a debate, especially if you had Jeff on the other side, because you usually won any debate, but not in the long term. So... Of course, I'm not political. But this is a really important debate. I should acknowledge Carol too, the chair of our community who's joined us today. Thank you very much, Carol, for your inspiration and leadership at our community. It's greatly appreciated. So, looking out here, it's just fabulous. And we're all part of this debate. And the debate is, essentially, is our heartfelt belief in neighbourhoods, is it passé? Is it gone? Is it finished? And has the individual taken over? And I don't know about you, but I often feel challenged by the extent to which individual rights are put aside rather than the individual is actually supreme. And my second thought on this debate is, well, why do they have to be opposite? Isn't it possible to strengthen individuals in a community and at the same time strengthen communities? Who actually makes it a competition? People naturally competitive, as some like to believe? Or do people actually want to live in good communities where their kids prosper or they prosper themselves? And I want to tell you a story that leads me to my position, I guess, on this. I took Michael, my eldest son, to school, who is now 46 this year. So you can all do your mental calculations as to which birthday it is. Of course I was a child bride. And I was a bride. But I took Michael to school in Croydon North Primary in 1965. He'd been to kinder, and we'd done the usual fight for a decent kinder bit out in the sticks, as it was then. And we walked in, these young mums who were very keen that their children would succeed, and I'd been a teacher, so I had a bit of a clue about the importance of education. My mum and dad had only gone to grade 8, but they were absolutely determined I was going to have a good education, and they went without things to allow me to do that, and they worked to support the state schools I went to. And then I took him to school, and the principal stood out the front and in the calmest possible way said, your children are going to be in a class of 54 students. He didn't even apologise. Mind you, it wasn't actually his fault, it was the system's fault. And in part it was the community's fault, because we hadn't actually demanded quality education for every child in Victoria. And if you think it was bad at Croydon North Primary, then have a look at what it was like at Catholic schools, and have a look at what it was like at Fitzroy North, where the new refugee kids then were being taught in broom cupboards, literally taught in broom cupboards. And they were the kids who were saying to me as I went to visit as the parent activist, what does grass blowing in the wind actually look like? So I thought, along with the other, as I walked out of the classroom, and the principal hadn't allowed any questions. I learned quickly about how to make principals answer questions, of course, after that. But we walked out to the front gate, and as parents do, they gathered round the gate, and somebody said, what are we going to do about this? And unfortunately, the somebody was me. And I learnt very quickly in that. And this, I think, is the connection between the individual and the community. That if you want to change something for your own child, then you have to change it for other children and with their parents, and as they get older, with the children. And that's my biggest thought, I guess, about the topic of debate today. And I'm not just trying to play the role of peacemaker here, because I think the two arguments are connected, but it is also very important to sort these arguments through, because constantly we have thrown at us the competitive model, the fear model, all those things that divide us into individuals. And yet I've had the pleasure of chairing the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Victorian Communities for the last 12 months, which is advisory to John Thwaites on what works and what doesn't work in community strengthening, and our report will soon be released, based on what you've said to us in all the places we've visited. And I note that people are having this debate, but on the other hand, they're not just having a debate. Community strengthening doesn't ever start with governments. Community strengthening is something communities have been doing in Australia for thousands of years, because Indigenous communities were doing it long before non-Indigenous. And what we're really talking about here is how communities can own the debate and own the process and own the progress, because that's the way for sustainable change. Now, we've got a group of terrific people here to be part of that debate, and before I actually introduce them all, I would like to acknowledge that the Kulin Nation and pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and thank them for allowing us to use their land and for the custodianship they've showed. And I hope we can learn from it, and I think we are. Now, the first, we're going to do it in the proper, I think proper as I can be, debate forum, and that means we'll have 2 speakers for, 2 speakers against in alternate order. and they can have a chip at each other as they pass through the argument, and then at the end the two lead speakers will actually sum up. I was actually quite autocratic about the leaders, so I'll probably get some flack about that, just because I had it in front of me, really. So, and then there'll be an opportunity for a short break so you can all exercise your shoulders, your tongues and anything else you wish to exercise. Chris, you are not to comment. And then question time. And in question time, I'd be more than happy for people to formulate that additional point they wanted to make, as long as you keep it short, because I think this is an ongoing debate. And I'd also be very keen for people to say in Victoria, particularly, but across Australia as well, what you think that government policy and practice could do to assist with this in partnership with other people, business and communities. So we'll come to the questions a bit later, but first I have great pleasure in introducing to you speaker number one of the case for Neighbourhoods are dead and the individual now reigns supreme. When I read Jacqui's CV here, I thought there were two Jacqui Katonas, because I can remember meeting Jacqui for, I think, the first time, though I'd seen her on television, at a quite social luncheon in Toorak, and Jacqui and a wide range of women there to talk about the whole issue of Kakadu and uranium mining. And Jacqui held us enthralled in terms of her community's stand, the organisation of that community's stand, and all the almost octopus-like tentacles she was putting out to involve the broader community in making her cause and her community cause our cause. And then I read this really modest CV and I thought, maybe there are two Jacqui Katonas. But I'm pleased, well, I'd love there to be two. In fact, I'd love there to be 202. But, and there will be one day. But...
Have you been breeding again?
Well, they did try to stamp you lot out, but your highest birth rate. Now, Jacqui, I'm not putting the birth rate entirely on you. But I'm going to read you the proper, I've given it a real build-up, but here's some facts on the matter. Jacqui is currently a development worker, campaigner, researcher, editor and writer. She's got one of the best sense of humours, that's not written in here. She's a member of the Jock, yes, of the Jock clan, located within Kakadu National Park. She's currently the CEO of the Lumbu Indigenous Community Foundation, which is based in Brisbane. She's worked for several Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander orgs, media and campaigns, and has a broad range of experience in issues affecting Indigenous communities, such as family removal and deaths in custody. She's worked as the coordinator of the National Coalition of Aboriginal Organisations Secretariat to ensure an organisational structure for information movement within a nationwide network of Aboriginal organisations. So she's been at the grassroots and she's been at the organisational structure level. She's represented this organisation at the United Nations Working Party on Indigenous Populations in the area of information. In 1995, Jacqui was Stolen Generations Project Officer for the Northern Australian Aboriginal Legal Aid Service, providing assistance for the coordination of litigation on behalf of the stolen generation of the Northern Territory. In 1996, she took up the position of Executive Officer of the Aboriginal Corporation in Kakadu, Gunjami, to work with family members, assisting them establish organisational frameworks and strategies for land management and mitigation of negative social impacts experienced by the community. That means she organised to stop in part, the deleterious impacts of uranium mining, particularly the third proposal. And she attracted women and men from across Australia to join her cause, including one, some of you will know, the 80-year-old, nearly 90-year-old Molly Hadfield from Northcote, who rang me when she was out on a demonstration with Jacqui and said, "Can you go bail for me?" I said, "What? Where are you? What have you done in Northcote?" She said, "No, I'm up in Kakadu." So I don't know, getting old ladies into trouble, that's a bit much. She's the recipient of a range of awards, including the Australian Conservation Foundation's Peter Rawlinson, the late Peter Rawlinson Environment Award, and the Island Nations Goldman Environment Prize, and she's one great woman. Please welcome Jacqui Katona.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your warm welcome here. And I argue for today that neighbourhoods are dead and the individual reigns supreme, but not in the way you think it might be argued. I'm sure the other team, my esteemed colleagues, peers across the other side of the stage, will celebrate neighbourhoods. Will tell you that they're part of the glue of our society. I want you to think about neighbourhoods and what they mean to a whole range of people, because I argue that neighbourhoods are not communities. Neighbourhoods are used, the word neighbourhood is used in a very different way. It doesn't represent the gel that keeps us together. It doesn't represent a future. Neighbourhood, in fact, is an economic term. Neighbourhood allows governments to capture and contain human interaction. Our statistics are organised on the basis of neighbourhoods. I want to talk about the human beings. I want to talk about the individuals. I want to talk about the diversity that makes up the constructs that government uses to try and make us bland. Neighbourhoods herd us into uniform lives. They make us targets of consumerism. Advertising agencies love neighbourhoods because they can calculate the amount of money that they can extract. Neighbourhoods have reduced our diversity to a polyglot. Neighbourhoods are not communities. Neighbourhoods are vessels into which governments can pump policy. Neighbourhoods allow the observation of the rat race. Communities, on the other hand, are dynamic, energetic, and they support individuals. Individuals like you, individuals like me, individuals with strengths, weaknesses, individuals who work together, individuals who respect and support one another, individuals who build and maintain communities, individuals who indeed are communities. I invite you and our colleagues across the table to get out of your neighbourhoods and get into your communities. You have individual talents. You have individual contributions. You are building a future which recognises the value of individuals and the needs of individuals, that individuals are the building blocks of communities, the cornerstones, the foundations. Your individual courage working with your communities, your individual inspiration, your individual strength gathers others to communities. Celebrate the individual voices. Our collaboration as individuals is a gift for future generations. You have to listen when you hear other individuals. This is what we are reminded of when we have individual gatherings of individuals. You have to think when you talk with other individuals. You have to give and take to build a community and grow a community. Don't simply observe and generalise about neighbourhoods. Break out and claim your community as individuals. In this political climate, we need the creativity of all individuals. We need every individual's talent. We need the inspiration of all individuals, because it's too easy for this federal government to undermine the strength of our communities by using the Trojan horse that neighbourhoods and the terms similar give to them as strength. Indigenous people need you as individuals to clearly understand us as individuals within our communities. Not fall prey to the generalisations which have neutralised the debate in Australia, and in fact that has painted me as and all other Aboriginal women and men as eternal victims. I don't live in a neighbourhood of victims. I live with resilient individuals, vibrant individuals, individuals who want to take hold of opportunities for the future. Individuals who inspire, connect with each other, enliven each other, lead each other to action, and build prosperity in our community, not achieve the economic outcomes that a government wants to see for a neighbourhood. All those resources are vital, and all those resources are contained in all of us as individuals who can collectively bring about change. Change that's so necessary in the broader Australian community. For all the debate that's been happening recently about Aboriginal issues, I think one thing that seemed to have escaped the glaze or the gaze of the media is the changes to the Aboriginal Land Rights Act that are taking place in the Northern Territory. Communities are becoming neighbourhoods, our Federal Minister is telling us. Neighbourhoods which should be open for sale. And in fact, the community of Gallowinku has been told that the services which other communities enjoy as part of standard of living in Australia, the average standard of living, services such as a reasonably good sewerage system, housing, clean water coming to you through a tap inside your house. Those things aren't affordable in the neighbourhood of Gallowinku. Gallowinku has to be open for business to access those services. They have to trade rights to land to enjoy the same standard of living as the majority of other Australians. We are, as Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory, very worried about the Trojan horse of neighbourhoods and what that will mean for the future of our children and the ability that we will have to ensure that our cultural values are considered to be just as important as economic imperatives. The responsibility that you as individuals can take to bring about change, to join as a community, to act in solidarity with our community. That kind of change needs to happen in Australia. And that kind of change needs to happen with all of us understanding the path forward, not as a polyglot, not as people who operate under generalisations, but people who know and respect one another as individuals. Our community includes all of us. We are all responsible to ourselves and each other as a community. Hiding behind economic terms like neighbourhood isn't going to advance Australia fair. Thank you.
And how disciplined is she? She didn't even get the bell. Didn't have to be belled. There you go. That's thousands have tried, I
She's a
think, Jacqui.
responsible individual.
Thank you.
Contributing to a responsible community debate. Speaker 2, the first speaker against, is Peter Kenyon, who many of you will know. He's a social entrepreneur and community enthusiast. I've actually haven't met too many people who are more enthusiastic about building community from the ground up than Peter. Now, a lot of people think that community strengthening was invented in Victoria a few years ago, but it wasn't, though it has been greatly assisted by this government. Peter's been working around Australia on this issue for 15 years, and I think I first met him in regional economic development. He's also been working overseas, and every time I hear him speak, he puts a fresh and creative way to stimulate the debate on the twins of community and economic renewal. He is motivated by all the things that Mary talked about so wonderfully this morning, about creating healthy, inclusive, sustainable and enterprising communities. His background is as a youth worker, a teacher, a very honourable profession, a youth education officer and a tertiary lecturer. His employment experiences have included Director of Employment in WA, Manager of the Community Employment Development Unit in New Zealand, Coordinator of the Natal Job Creation and Enterprise Strategy in South Africa. His international consulting work involves assignments in more than 40 countries. Heavens above, do you have a partner? You're as bad as me. Mine aren't in 40 countries though. No, it's not my partners. Over the years, Peter has become convinced of something that I'm passionately convinced about, as is our communities, that one cannot develop communities from the top down, nor from the outside in, but only from the inside out, and for their residents to invest themselves, ideas, assets and resources in the process. In 1980, he created the Bank of IDEAS, which is an acronym that stands for Initiatives for the Development of Enterprising Action and Strategies. The Bank of Ideas works to promote such a shift and help with the necessary facilitation, ideas and skills. But it's more than that. It actually assists all of us who are working in and with communities to connect, because one of the things perhaps we don't do so well when we're working so hard in our own communities is actually share the stories and share what we've learned and build on what others have learned. And Peter is the master of doing just that. Peter, please pick up the first, as the first speaker for the case against.
Fellow conference attendees, isn't this an incredibly sad kind of like day? Isn't this an incredible wasted opportunity that we are spending 2 hours in this amazing event debating this particular issue? Firstly, this conference for the last 2.5 days has been listening to the extraordinary stories of the power of neighbourhood and community, capped off by those amazing stories that Meredith just shared with us, that Tenderloin community. How many of us will ever forget the power within that particular neighbourhood? And yes, Jacqui, most of us are here to celebrate the power of neighbourhood and community, for which we do not apologise. We are advocates that communities and neighbourhoods are not dead, but really are the most important unit that brings together these individuals to hold hands and make a difference. Doesn't it grate each of us to kind of like listen to that word all the time, individualism, keep coming through? Secondly, we've got the privilege of having someone like Jacqui here this morning. And what do? We ask her to speak against this topic. Jacqui, you led one of the most powerful stories in the nation's history of the power of community. The way that that community in Kakadu fought that uranium mining giant and won. It's in kind of like the folklore of the power of community. And yet we ask you to talk against it. Isn't that incredibly sad? Thirdly, what a sad day that people like Rhonda and Joe Caddy would kind of like allow within a conference to give prominence and profile to kind of like these thoughts, and particularly to highlight the words of that high priestess of kind of like individualism, Maggie Thatcher. Those classic words that there is no such thing as society, there are only individuals. Joan, that must rankle every political bone in your body to kind of like allow this to kind of like be happening. You know, while Jacqui and a colleague, Chris, I'm sure will continue to share personal and community illustrations of why neighbourhoods and communities in decline, can I really share with you those stories of celebration from the half full bit of the glass? Let's not focus any longer on the half empty bit. Let's focus on that half full bit, that experience that each of us on a daily basis see as we kind of like live and work within our neighbourhoods and communities. Those stories that reinforce our belief that neighbourhood and community spirit is certainly not dead but is functioning, and in fact provides really the whole essence of hope for the future of our society and for our nation. Firstly, can I just remind you that what we've been reminded of often in this conference, that there are well over 700,000 community organisations that are operating throughout this country. Many of them, most of them, working at the neighbourhood community level. What incredible organisational life for a nation of only 20 million people. We were reminded by Phil yesterday that levels of volunteerism are not actually in decline. The community giving is actually going up. And in my area where I particularly want to work with young people, we're finding a phenomenal interest in kind of like the ability, the interest and the power of young people to start to actively get involved in their communities. Go to a place like Bendigo where, you know, that lead-on program over 4 years has mobilised hundreds of young people. And in the process, those young people have contributed over 80,000 hours of kind of like effort to kind of like building their neighbourhood through their initiatives and their programs. Secondly, we've seen unprecedented interest in the whole area of neighbourhood economic development. For example, while we have seen the forces of corporate greed and the focus on trying to return to the individual shareholder and the rationalisation that's seen the loss of many services in our neighbourhoods and our communities, while that's been going on, we've also seen the forces of neighbourhoods coming together. And I want to quote the incredible example of the community banking movement, probably the most exciting neighbourhood economic movement we've seen since the cooperative movement of the early part of the 20th century. We've seen kind of like because of this focus on the need to return to the individual profit and to the shareholders, things that our opponents just want to raise all the time. The fact that over 1,000 bank branches are being closed down by those kind of like greedy little banks, the big four, in not only rural areas but low socio-economic suburbs of many of our cities. But to see the response of people in our neighbourhoods and communities, and today over 180 communities have mobilised collectively and established their own bank, where the profits have been returned back to the community, where traditional services and jobs have been kept at that local effort. That hasn't happened because of government or corporate intervention. It's happened because people believe in the power of what they can do at the local level and within their own. And the Bendigo Bank tell us that there are now over 2,000 additional communities in dialogue with them about wanting to establish this option within their neighbourhoods. And not just in rural areas, but many of our kind of like suburbs and neighbourhoods of our cities. And it's not a simple task. These neighbourhoods have got to raise up to $600,000 amongst themselves to kind of like do it. And yet places as small as Muckenbudden with its 400 people have managed to pull it off. And it's not just banks, but we're seeing communities and neighbourhoods mobilised to retain and establish services like the picture theatres and their retail outlets and even airline services. And thank God, Rhonda, the pubs, we're rallying to kind of like keep those neighbourhood pubs there. Go to the little town of Kenyon and see where 2,000 residents last year kind of like raised almost $300,000 to keep their roadhouse and keep their garage kind of like functioning. And in the process turn it into an incredible meeting centre and vocal point. 6 years ago, go to the New South Wales town of Yeovil, where 450 residents had their hospital closed down by the state government. But that neighbourhood spirit, they rallied, and those 450 people said, up you government, we're going to reopen this as a neighbourhood community-run hospital. And in the process, staff went from 4 to 55. The number of beds have increased from 8 to 35. 2 new doctors have kind of like been added to the town, and they've quadrupled the kind of like hospital health services that community were able to provide. And we say neighbourhoods are dead, communities are dead. Amazing. Thirdly, let me say that neighbourhoods are our incubators of innovation when it comes to what communities can do in terms of that everlasting change of circumstances. Let me just share with you a couple of illustrations, just what's happening around our own schools, for example. This is the story of Yeovil. But you know, in my own community, for example, where an intergenerational kind of like food club's been established in the school, where older people have come together, and their initiative has led to now over 180 other neighbourhoods and schools kind of like starting to look at what they can do. The whole walking school bus is something that's taking across the nation. People are beginning to see that at that local level we can intervene in what is just kind of like one of those fundamental things that we can actually do. We are, at the local level, constantly demonstrating that we can be kind of like those incubators of intervention and that we can actually do it. Can I just also share with you finally just the way that the spirit of neighbourhood compassion can kind of like start to actually operate. And one of the great stories is this particular woman who's suffering from this wasting disease, close to death, but needing people to be with her at every mealtime to just encourage her and to kind of like be able to see how a neighbourhood could rally to find people to be there 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, just encouraging her. To me, what an incredible example of that will only happen at kind of like the local neighbourhood area. And today, this girl Penny, it's just great to see kind of like the difference in our lives. And she refers to that circle of support that my neighbourhood was able to create around me has actually made what has made kind of like the difference. Go to Colin Amberley. Here is a community who said, look, we want to be an inclusive place, everyone we want to value within our community. And there that they had a group of 7 young women suffering from Down syndrome. And what have the community done? It wouldn't have happened through state or corporate intervention, but those communities have created this incredible Colin Amberley cafe. It's almost 30 years old, run and managed by those young women. It's now the heart of the kind of like the community. And again, an example of what a community, a neighbourhood of 500 people are able to achieve, that we at that kind of like individualistic level and at that state level could never ever kind of like achieve. And so that there are stories everywhere near where I live, the Friendship Park that's been created, because people said let's create an inclusive park where people and children of all abilities can kind of like enjoy. Again, what people are doing when people are inspired to kind of like hold hands at the local level. Can I conclude by restating my belief that we need to stand up strongly against this emphasis upon political and marketplace individualism, the way it values kind of like individualism above all things. Nothing, I can say, will diminish or kill that desire by most of us to kind of like see the importance for community, neighbourhood and community connection. And can I just leave you those wonderful words of Leif Christensen, who simply reminds us all of us have a gene for community. We are yearning for that sense of connection and harmony and goodwill with others, living with shared resources and more cooperation than we do in mainstream culture. May community, may neighbourhood live, and may we raise that flag unashamedly against those forces that attempt to reduce us to economic terms like individualism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. You really cut me to the quick, I have to say, with the Thatcher comment. And I won't have Rhonda cut to the quick either, so we both have to complain about that. But I do remember with some amusement my daughter, when I think she must have been about 6 or 8 or something, when Maggie Thatcher became the first woman Prime Minister, although not the first woman leader, of UK. And my poor daughter, who'd been subject to the feminist movement for some time, is sitting there in front of the telly, because they all had to watch the news, and they still do. And she was looking quite puzzled, and I was getting the dinner, and she finally came over to me and she said, "She the first woman Prime Minister as that lady?" And I didn't debate the lady bit, I just said, yes. And she said, "Do we like her, Mum?" My children grew up in such an atmosphere of freedom about their own views. However, we're practising freedom here, freedom to have views, freedom to debate, and freedom to slide in one's argument. Have you noticed how neighbourhood slides into community and community slides back into neighbourhood? Can't resist that as an ex-English teacher. There are a few other slides taking place, but fortunately not slippery slides, down to being against community participation in whatever form, and community rights in whatever form you describe it. I hadn't met Chris Newell until today, I thought, but then I said to Dennis, no, I think I have met him. It turns out we had once in WA. He's another traveller. I'm a bit worried about what he's going to say and do, because he's been making noises like shooting people down at this table. Now, I'm sure he'll explain that later, but when he goes, pow, I think, my goodness me, watch out, Hutch. So, but in his real life, he's Associate Professor in Medical Ethics within the School of Medicine at the University of Tassie. He's in charge of the Personal and Professional Development theme of the Tasmanian Medical course, one of 5 themes in the medical school's new integrated undergraduate curriculum. Wow, you mean they look at people as a whole?
Well, we do our best.
You do your best, good.
It's causing enormous trauma for my colleagues in the medical school. They actually need medical treatment as a consequence.
As part of this work, Chris, as you can tell, teaches as researchers in medical ethics, medical humanities and chronic illness. He's got a particular interest in bringing the wisdom of consumers into academic research and teaching, and he also consults in the area of bioethics, health and disability. Christopher's current board memberships include the Consumers Health Forum of Australia, the Australian Telecommunications Industry Ombudsman Council, and the Australian General Practice Accreditation Limited, and he's just been appointed to the National Health and Medical Research Council. Krista is also currently a member of the Australian Commission for Safety and Quality in Healthcare, a commission charged with reforming the Australian health system. Good luck, Chris. But there's a lot of people here who are ready to help us, whether they're in their neighbourhoods or in their communities or as individuals. And he chairs the editorial committee of Australian Health Consumer. Heaps of publications, 7 co-authored edited books, 200 journal articles and book chapters, and one of his recent books include Disability in Australia, jointly with Gerard Goggin, UNSW Press, which won the non-fiction Human Rights Award in the 2005 Australian Human Rights Awards. So please welcome Chris.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's devastating. It's appalling. But it's time we faced up to it. Neighbourhoods are dead, and sadly, the individual now reigns supreme. That's right. I say sadly because which of us does not want to reclaim accounts of community and the support of neighbourhoods? Yet my sad, melancholy task is to help you to face a devastating reality that none of us wants to face. Indeed, our opponents have already argued that there is actually some hope happening and on the horizon. They cite a few examples of neighbourhoods and communities working together. But Peter avoided noting his own implicated background. He's paid to say these things. He avoids recognising the individualistic policies and economics which have funded the very work that he actually talks of. The individualised funding responses to the loudest voices and the desire to get hospitals off the front page. Individualised responses. Even, Peter, in your talk of people with disabilities suffering, the language that we abhor, which supports disability as the individual's private trauma. Well, of course, they would affirm communities and neighbourhoods. Peter and Hutch are nice people. You don't know Hutch. But how realistic are they? Have they recognised your reality? Search your hearts and minds. Perhaps Peter, in talking of the half-full glass, may well have had a few too many half or even full glasses. Look, I invite you, at that mellow glow. The frequent reference to pubs. It comes from somewhere. Yet, much as it pains me, let me remind you of a few distressing realities. In the first place, there is the continuing oppression of Indigenous peoples where not just neighbourhoods are dead, but indeed Aboriginal nations have been wiped off the face of the earth. How can we, in any conscience, take any other stance? It would be a denial of the racist relations which dominate in this country. Secondly, we need to recognise that the current racism, sexism, disableism and ageism which is practised is a function of individualism. That's right, Maggie Thatcher won. As you know, she supports this notion that there are just individual economic actors. Right around the world, individualism has swept through and blown away the vestiges of neighbourhoods, destroyed communities. In New Zealand, there was Rogernomics. In Victoria, there was Kennett, and that great betrayer of the disability rights movement, the head of the Department of Community Services, Patterson, with his claims that advocacy and community organisations were piss and wind groups. So now, despite a few revisionist policies to the contrary, increasingly we have a social policy driven by an account of individualistic economics. We are responsible for purchasing services. We are individualised clients. Even within such areas of disability, beware. For example, the notion of individualised care packages. yet again speaks again of how the individual reigns supreme. Sadly, we know the cost for individuals when we do not have the wealth, the personal resources and the skills with which to assemble and organise our lives. Take another example, mental health. All of a sudden, governments are starting to wake up to something we've been saying for some time. Those individual, highly stressed, devastated voices. That we have actually helped to create circumstances that create mental illness, disability and disadvantage. Yet even within these particular initiatives, which are supposedly about resilience and community building, we also see individualism reigning supreme. Jeff Kennett granted a massive package to take on Beyond Blue. Well, I don't know about you, but I would certainly welcome a $6-figure package to help me address my depression. Perhaps the 1 in 5 of the Australian population have yet to collect their cheque. Oh yes, the cheque's in the mail. Strangely, of course, we also see in the account of individualism that, of course, all individuals are equal. It's just that some are more equal than others. Then there's the stark, devastating reality which denies the existence of accounts of community and neighbours. Within Australia, we are so individualised that we have a perfectly legal situation where refugees are locked behind barbed wire and out in the middle of deserts because they're so dangerous, and special laws are created to remove these odious bodies from our shores. Indeed, we even lock up people, individuals, who are stateless, and it's perfectly legal. Ask the High Court. And the appalling, devastating reality is that if we had any sense of community or neighbourhood, we would have joined together and reclaimed notions of parliamentary democracy, we the people, and demanded that our elected representatives give back and reinstate accounts of human dignity. It's appalling. It's a devastating reality that I greet you with. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, in arguing that neighbourhoods and communities really are dead, I want to remind you of the power that you have as individuals. For Jacqui and I face an uphill battle. Which of us wants to believe that communities are dead? Which of us wants to face up to racism, sexism, disableism, and ageism? More importantly, look at the way, look at the disadvantage for the case that we are presented with. This is a conference all about community and neighbourhood, where we have the little annoying dissenting voice, which is Jacqui and myself. We've been set up to lose. Look at the topics on the program. The Community Summit, challenge the power of one. Perhaps even worse, a conference auspiced by an organisation, Our Community. The Community Leadership Oration, even the Gala Australian Community Idol Awards. Perhaps most obscene, showing how biased and unbalanced the whole situation is, we do battle today for a trophy that's got community in the name. Even, dare I suggest, we have a bias, I'm very sad to say, on the part of our adjudicator, the Honourable Joan Kirner. She's briefed for the opposition as chair of the Ministerial Advisory Council on Victorian Communities. Not the council promoting the rights of Victorian individuals. Bias is everywhere. So, fellow delegates, wake up. Smell what they are shoveling. The subtle and not so subtle agenda on the seemingly innocent face of Rhonda. Assert your rights as individuals. That's right, today I invite you as individuals to rise up, register your dissatisfaction with the brainwashing of the conference organisers. Assert your rights as individuals. For today we ask you to acknowledge a deeply disturbing reality that neighbourhoods really are dead and the individual now reigns supreme. We ask you, we demand, we plead with you, diverse individuals that you are, to join with me in recognising that devastating reality, and then, and only then, once we have faced that as individuals, we can join together to reclaim and to rebuild accounts of community and neighbourhood. Thank you.
Sounded like an election speech to me. Glad you weren't sitting opposite me, but then I hope you would never have been. That was fantastic. Thank you for that stirring contribution about this whole issue, which we do have to take seriously, about what communities are built on. What are they built on? How do we build communities? Are they built on distinct groups? Are they built between groups? Are they built between individuals? What is an inclusive community? Is it one where 75% of the community is in there? I went to a council recently who may be here, so it better remain unnamed, to talk about funding for a community plan. And I looked at the proposal, and this is a council with one of the largest Indigenous communities in Victoria. And I asked where their representatives were. Oh, we will get around to that, they said. So I thought, yeah, and we'll get around to the grant too, a long way away. But the issue there was the community had defined itself by those who were in the partnership, not those who who should be in the partnership. So it's an ongoing challenge. I don't pretend it's anything else, having been head of a government where, while we moved the retention rate along, as John said this morning, significantly to something like 89%, the Indigenous kids' retention rate, though it was higher than it is now, was still just over half of that. And so we do need to keep focusing on these two challenging issues of community, what is it, and communities, how do you make them inclusive? And there's not a much better person to do that than Hutch Hussein. I like your new title, Hutch. Hutch Hussein is the Business Development Manager of the Northern Migrant Resource Centre in Melbourne's northern suburbs, which does a fantastic job. Hutch's background is in social work, and during her career she's worked with at-risk young people, domestic violence victims, refugees and migrants, and whilst in London in foster care. And she's worked with me too, which was the hardest task of all, doing the centenary of Federation, the women's meeting in the Parliament and the Women's Honour Roll. Currently, she works with and for migrant and refugee communities by securing funds, partnerships and sponsorships for community building projects. She's got a fantastic way of working with women, particularly from refugee communities. And strangely, even though her centre and other centres were doing a great job, they lost their funding in a competitive model of funding to the private sector. In 2000, that's not in this, I put that in. In 2002, in between her social work positions, Hutch worked for 3.5 years as Ministerial Advisor to Mary Delahunty, the Victorian Minister for Education then, and later became the Minister for Women's Affairs and Minister for the Arts, and significantly involved in getting a good domestic violence policy and practice up. Hutch is a really passionate young woman. She's particularly passionate about empowering young people, in particular young women, at the individual and at the global level. In her spare time, she also volunteers with a number of organisations aiming to empower women to stand up, make a difference in public life, know they can and get on with it. She co-convenes Emily's List in Victoria, of course a very important organisation, and was also a founding board member for the Women's Rights Action Network of Australia. She's also an active member of ELRA, the Abortion Law Reform Association, which is committed to taking abortion out of the Criminal Act in Victoria. And in between her activism, she enjoys making short films after she dusts off scripts waiting in her bottom drawer. Currently, she's writing a script about setting up Emily's List, and she's a hard taskmaster because I want to keep talking and she wants to keep stopping me and into her little scripts. But it's a considerable range of skills she has, and she truly believes in empowered communities. Please welcome Hutch Hussein.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Joan. Neighbourhoods are not dead. The crowd here today is proof against Chris's thesis. Some of us here today are representing projects or organisations that have grown from neighbourhoods or fighting for neighbourhoods. But some of us are also here representing organisations just of common interest that bring us together. We've come together in these organisations to advance that community of interest needs, because together, as a collective, we do better. Neighbourhoods are not just physical neighbourhoods. They're spiritual, they're bound together by an allegiance, a connection, or an identity. To say that we're individuals only is to say we're not human and don't have an interest in what is happening locally, nationally, and globally. As well as being the adjudicator's birthday, today is actually World Refugee Day. Separate from the wonderful work that organisations like the Sanctuary for Refugees Network that we heard about yesterday do, and the neighbourhoods that support them, Australia, as part of its humanitarian program, settles 13,000 refugees. Even the government, which some regard as fostering the individual, undertakes its UN obligation and does its bit as being part of a member of the global neighbourhood. At the Northern Migrant Resource Centre, where I work in Melbourne's northern metropolitan suburbs, new arrivals gravitate and seek local connections. They come to us and tell us they want to meet real Aussies and feel part of the community. The NMRC facilitates this community connection through a variety of programs, and I'll allude to two today to demonstrate our case. One is the Bridging the Gaps with Basketball program, where refugee youth want to connect with their local peers to feel like more than just a passive member of their neighbourhood. And then through our aged care program, older migrants thrive on the social interaction they have with their peers. Everyone needs and gravitates towards their neighbours. The Bridging the Gaps basketball program, and there are 3 young women there in our basketball team in Coburg. It's about refugee youth connecting with their peers and their fellow citizens. We have off-duty police officers recruited from local police stations who are engaged as volunteer coaches, which translates to improved relationships with police via the mentoring for the young people and breaks down negative perceptions of the police force and police officers having a greater understanding of these kids and their situation. The kids understand the importance of punctuality at training and games, commitment and discipline to playing in a team sport, and the values of fairness, teamwork and friendship, which all have wider application in their everyday lives. They know that as individuals, they can't even play a basketball team, let alone make change in society. They also have increased cultural awareness amongst themselves. In that team, we have Somali, Tongan, Sudanese, Timorese, Indigenous and Anglo-Australian young people. There's the increased social connectedness that comes and a sense of belonging, because fundamentally, we're in communities. The aged care program that we operate have cultural groups coming together with themselves, amongst themselves in community groups or multicultural groups sharing their culture and customs. These older people come together because they know that as individuals their lifespan is reduced. They keep their minds active with activities, art and craft, and they socialise and we organise day trips. We foster this by facilitating and hosting these groups and creating a neighbourhood and community each day of the week. We're also part of a national neighbourhood. We come together as a nation when it comes to being brought together by sporting events. As you saw from the last program I mentioned, sport breaks down many barriers. We barrack for our national team, we show strength in the face of danger or a crisis, and we bat with and for the underdogs. The Commonwealth Games recently was a great example of us as a community. Even cynics and not so sports mad Melburnians got into the jovial mood that took over Melbourne. I met some of them like myself who got patriotic and let themselves be dragged to, yet enjoyed the Commonwealth Games opening ceremony. Even if collectively they were scratching their heads about the duck, but they were doing it collectively. The volunteers, they were named the Commonwealth Games' greatest asset, 15,000 of them in their unmissable aqua and orange uniforms, who made Melbourne feel like a neighbourhood where there was someone who looked out for them or for the lost tourists. Those 15,000 who took annual leave, some of you are here today, or put their lives on hold for the amazing experience, demonstrated there is such a thing as society, which is far greater than the sum of anything individuals can achieve on their own. And as The Age observed at the time, fears for the loss of community spirit were banished, the goodwill spread, the games were a rebuke to cynicism. These are photos of soccer fans, Australians and Brazilians, one in Munich in a beer hall, the other in Federation Square. It was standing room only yesterday morning as 10,000 people braved the cold and crammed conditions to watch the World Cup match against Brazil. Why didn't they do this at home as individuals in front of their TV? It was much more fun doing it this way. If that isn't proof that neighbourhoods are alive, then I don't know what is. In The Age, it was reported that one guy, George Peoples, 41, an Irishman who's been living in Melbourne, said, "A year ago, no one in Melbourne cared about football. I was depressed to be in this country. Now it's 4 a.m. in Fed Square and it's full. Now I'm thinking about taking out citizenship." He's finally felt part of a neighbourhood, even though this closet bonding happens in soccer communities every day of the year. However, he and many others have been able to see the passion that's been given a public outlet within the World Cup. Australians come together, bound by their allegiance and their connection. The countdown to the rescue of the Beaconsfield miners in Tasmania was something that galvanised the country and all types of neighbourhoods. It was the first thing people wondered about in their walking groups and their swimming groups and in workplaces. And in fact, in my own home, for 12 days in a row, the first thing my partner said to me each morning, knowing that I'd read the paper and listened to the radio, was, "Are they out yet?" But we also come together to show concern for events and for people overseas, because we're part of the global neighbourhood. We show we care as a nation, we show that we're all connected by our humanity, and we have an interest sometimes in just living vicariously and knowing how the other half live. If the individual reigned supreme, the media, in particular, magazines, wouldn't exist. Even Rupert Murdoch has an interest in making sure neighbourhoods are not dead. Australians came together and donated a record amount to our neighbours in the South Pacific region as they struggled to rebuild their lives after the tsunami. We also volunteered to assist in tsunami-affected areas. We do care about people, not in our, even those who are not in our immediate neighbourhood. You're probably wondering, why I'm even drawing on Kylie to put our case. News of Kylie's breast cancer diagnosis led to a flood of notes and well wishes. People took stock and made time to have their own checks done. There's no irony in the Neighbours star still being cared for by members of the global neighbourhood. I'm going to sink lower. Even Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie know that neighbourhoods are not dead, as our interest is not confined to just Australian stars. The media knows this and thrives on this. 2,304,000 is the readership of New Idea. The interest in Pitt and Jolie's baby is the last argument I give to you to demonstrate that we care about other humans, even those whose lives are far removed from ours. In fact, Pitt and Jolie themselves as US citizens having a baby in Namibia showed that international borders are no barrier to feeling that we all live in a global neighbourhood. If the other side wins this debate, then the audience is saying that, as Peter said, Margaret Thatcher is right, and that after today we no longer care about our mates in our local, national or global neighbourhood. Don't let Maggie win when there's a former Labor Premier mediating this debate.
Well, she's a future Prime Minister. She's learning well how to drive the wedge between the various groups in the community. Fantastic, Hutch. Well done. Okay, now I'm going to ask Peter to sum up for the against side and to do any rebuttal he cares in his neighbourly way to do.
Sorry, do you need a drink?
Oh, you want the last word? No, I'm the adjudicator. And anyway, I'm more scared of Chris than I am of you.
Fellow conference delegates, can I just ask you to just reflect on a sober moment? Can any of you remember really anything of the content of our opponent's presentation? There was nil content, absolutely nil, and I'm sure there's not a person in the audience can reflect on what that content was. Sure, there was extensive use of denigration, there was humour, there was an appeal to be for the sympathy as the underdog, that pathetic effort, Chris. Fancy dragging poor Rhonda and saying that she'd biased this whole conference against you. A sign of a desperate person.
And I'm a pathetic crip as well.
Yeah. And Chris, your appeal to the audience was purely on the basis of the grounds of bias. Even dragging in my alcoholic problem as part of your audience. I mean, how low can you drop? Ladies and gentlemen, really think about it. Was there any content at all? What can you remember? The humour, the denigration, the sympathy vote stuff, but beyond that, nothing. Can I say today, neighbourhoods are alive. Community is what draws us. We all long to be part of the village. We all want a greater sense of it, including our opponents here today. They all want to be more involved in that village of life, both at that local neighbourhood and that worldwide neighbourhood that Hutch has reminded us is so alive and well. Can I, like Hutch, just remind you today, don't let Maggie win.
And now may I ask Jacqui to sum up the case for?
Maggie isn't here. Individuals in this country wouldn't allow someone like Maggie to determine how we spoke to one another. Individuals here today have far more respect for one another. My opposition hasn't addressed serious issues that relate to our vibrancy as a community. Our vibrancy resides in us as individuals. In fact, the misguided tirade that Peter went on about how disabled I was in this debate being on this side. Let me tell you, the common understanding in Kakadu at the time we started the campaign was, give up, you'll never beat them. My relative, Yvonne Margarula, as an individual, stood up and said, we'll give it a go, because I believe in the things that my parents stood for, my grandparents stood for, and all the generations before us. As an individual, she had to inspire her family, not to oppose, but to believe that we could win. And as a group of individuals, accommodate each other's needs in a very difficult campaign with very few resources. But we were able to inspire other individuals, and we'd make a beeline for them. And yes, we would draw them to our cause, because we would understand that women, like our adjudicator, Joan Kirner, also had something to lose if uranium mining went ahead in Kakadu. Joan and her peers were able to recognise that in our fight, in the pursuit of our individual needs, we were prepared to take responsibility, and that was a source of inspiration. There is a strength in celebrating the achievements of individuals, the achievements that individuals facilitate amongst one another. I don't believe that our opposition really addressed the issues of sexism and racism, disableism and ageism. In fact, we got a description from Hutch about the underlying funding approaches which facilitate her programs, and I can guarantee you the funding approaches use the language of clients. They group people together. They have a polyglot approach. It's one label that they deal with. I'm sure none of you here were romanced to think that a bureaucracy can recognise the needs of individuals within communities. Individuals don't achieve through individualism. Individuals achieve because we can respect our differences. And as for recruiting Kylie, the singing budgie, what a great success story for many young women to know that other women, like Kylie, can achieve international success, fame and wealth. Kylie has inspired as an individual. It's her resources. She took the risks. She put herself on the line. She was the one that was able to show other people that it was possible. Individuals open up the possibilities. Don't let our opposition tell you that Margaret Thatcher rules over all individuals. She doesn't. I'm an individual, and I know all the individuals here are building a better future by ignoring Margaret Thatcher and listening to each other, joining together and creating a future that we can all individually benefit from.
fantastic. Isn't it great to have in this community, broad community, where debates are so rare, to have actually a debate? Gets us out of our comfort zone. I'm going to do what I've been told to do for a change, which is actually ask you, by acclaim, to decide who won the debate. If I just think that the applause is a bit lukewarm, I think you know which way I'll decide, don't you? And that is I won't. So please indicate if you think the team for Neighbourhoods being dead and individual reigning supreme, being the wonderful Jacqui and Chris, won. I think I need the Channel 9 worm. Not Ray, just the worm. And against Peter and Hutch. Could I hear for them, please? Oh, great. It was like trying to decide to sell the State Bank is a seriously bad idea, but I had to do it. I think we all win. Thank you.